thanks for staying up later. In the category of someone needing no introduction, I think it's pretty clear, as you gaze at your set before I even say the name, that this is Raymond Burr, and as one measure, and this is so strange, as one measure of the impact of Perry Mason, folks may know that we tape more than one of these in a single day. So we're out here in Los Angeles taping the show, and the first guest today was the rapper Ice-T. And you're waiting in the green room. And as he walks off, and I go over to change clothes, I didn't see it, but some people on the staff told me that you and he had a little encounter. And what happened?
We had a great hello. He's been a fan for a long time, but that probably comes from his family because they were probably fans. I have a great following in certain communities and certain minorities, especially. I think I go back also in this community to the trouble we had in the 60s. And I was teaching down in Watts during the 60s, and I was one of the few people that went down there during the riots.
So while you were Perry Mason, or shortly after, you were teaching in Watts?
I was teaching radio and television, and in an empty store. My hubcaps used to be removed while I was doing the class. And finally I said to the class that I wasn't coming down any longer because I couldn't afford any more hubcaps. And that night there was about 12 sets of hubcaps back in the car again. So, but there are, you know, and every one of those people in that class went on to become really something in the business, one part of it or another. It's very good.
I was reading in the research that you feel, and your personal experience, I guess, supports this, that during the heyday of Perry Mason, which ran from 1957 through 66, first run, and has hardly been off the air at all in reruns since then, but during that period of time, when there were very few blacks in significant roles at all in television, that black viewers truly appreciated Perry Mason. I'll let you explain what you think the reasons why were.
Well, most people, really a great majority of people, blacks included, but all of the minorities included, really didn't understand the court system of the United States and didn't really know that it belonged to them, and it was for them as well as anyone else. And Perry Mason started that, and then all the other law shows kept going with it. So that when we had due process of law and we had our system of justice, that became very clear in those kind of shows, because we did do the truth. And the court system was little fantasized, but it was very honest as to what could happen in a courthouse and what could happen to you.
Of course, the critics said, as successful a show as it might have been, as entertaining as it might have been, that it actually distorted people's understanding, because what attorney is like Perry Mason? And what attorney only represents innocent people, as it turns out, and not only proves their innocence, but gets the real guilty party to break down and confess in the courtroom?
Jake Ehrlich in San Francisco went 30 years without losing a case. He was one of the great trial lawyers. Bennett Williams in Washington, D.C. went easily 30 years without losing a case, without losing. And a great variety of cases. I can name you probably 30 lawyers across this country in small offices and large ones that never lost. Some of them, of course, were very successful and got to pick their cases, but they still never lost.
Well, sometimes you can win a case, though, without representing someone who is totally innocent. All of Mason's clients were wrongly accused of murders.
We hope so. We hope so.
Mrs. Wainwright, wasn't all this not what Mr. Atlee did, but what you did?
What do you mean?
You went to see Stasi. You waited for him in the parking lot. And before the watchman came on duty, something terrible happened. Something which made you panicky when the gates started to close. Trapped, you said. Inside, you said.
The gates were going to close.
And then, didn't you drive Stasi's car off that lot?
Well, he was in no condition to drive. I'd already killed him.
when Mason lost a case, which he did what, 2 times, 3 times?
I thought it was 3 times. There was a trivia game that disagrees with me, or I disagree with it. They said once. I don't. We did about 300 shows, and I really didn't keep track of.
But it was infrequent enough and shocking enough that it really created a public reaction, right?
Well, people used to, go down the street and say, "Aren't you ever going to lose a case?" And it was a joke. We did this first show finally, and I don't know whether it was because it was a bad show and they didn't like the show, or they reacted to the fact that they didn't want Perry Mason to lose. But, we got thousands of letters to the effect of, "Don't ever do that again." So it's a funny reaction. We didn't expect that kind of a reaction at all from the same people who'd been joking, with us. So it was I think they were all qualified losses because Mr. Gardner was very successfully writing books with nobody losing. Perry Mason was not lose anything in his books, even a qualified loss.
Now, Earl Stanley Gardner was a lawyer himself.
Oh, very good one. He would have been probably, had he gone on being a trial lawyer, he would have been probably the best trial lawyer in the country.
And when he saw you audition for the part, was his first reaction, "That's the guy," or did you have to come back?
No, I auditioned for, I had done Place in the Sun, and they wanted me to do the prosecuting attorney. So I said, I don't want to do the prosecuting attorney, but I will test for it if I test for Mason too. So I did 2 tests.
You had been the prosecuting attorney in Place in the Sun.
Yeah. And I did the 2 tests, and he saw the 2 about 2 weeks later, saw both tests and said, "That's the fellow I want for Perry Mason." So that was the way it happened.
You had played a prosecutor, as you said, in A Place in the Sun. Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift were in that movie. It was a very well-regarded movie of its time. And at least to go through the paces, you auditioned for the Hamilton Berger role in Perry Mason. So you must have had some insight into what William Talman had to do in playing the long-suffering Berger week after week, episode after episode.
Bill Talman was just extraordinary. Just extraordinary. He was a very, very, very fine actor, and he could have done anything in the world that he chose to do. He would have been brilliant in any part of Shakespeare or any part of the classics, excuse me. But he was, he would come in, and if you had been doing this for the first time, and I was playing Perry Mason for the first time, and you were an actor for the first time in that show, and Talman was there, you would not have known from the way Talman played that part that he was going to lose. You would not have known. He played every time like he hadn't read the last 2 pages.
Or remembered the last 2 years.
Yes, exactly, or remembered the last 8 years. Right up to the time we ended Perry Mason, he was the same way.
I object, Your Honor. That calls for a conclusion of the witness.
Sustained. Your Honor, this case hinges on this empty tin box. If we knew the secret of why it is empty and what its function was supposed to be in determining proof of identity, we would also know the secret of who killed Elston Carr.
Your Honor, it's no secret. The state knows who killed Elston Carr. Mr. Mason is just manufacturing issues.
It was important at the end of each case, when they folded up their notes and whatnot, that he not look like he was completely overmatched. He never looked like the Washington Generals going out there against the Harlem Globetrotters.
Never once, and that was good because you always had the feeling that he was saying, you're the prosecutor, or you're the defense attorney, and I'm the prosecutor, and we'll both be doing this next week, and I'm going to win that one.
This one may be tough, but of all the episodes, talking about in the original series in the 50s and 60s, can you pick out a couple of favorite conclusions? I mean, everybody knows the form, using the great deductive reasoning and outwitting Hamilton Berger, often with the last-minute assistance of Paul Drake, who would do some legwork and come up with a key bit of information. Mason would not only successfully defend his client, but identify who the real culprit was, and more often than not, get that person to confess in court. Are there 2 or 3 closing scenes that really stand out for you as like the best examples of that? Just done to a T. You like them when you see them again in reruns?
No, there's only one that I liked, and that was a thing that we got, Bill Tallman and I got this put in together, where the woman confessed to the crime in an apartment, and she confessed to Mason, and I went to the producers and I said, you know, there's the prosecuting attorney is there, and he is the law. Have her confess to him.
But he was lying. He was lying all the time. Do you understand? Do you understand? He said he loved me. He said he loved me.
Drink.
Yeah.
And that, along with one scene I did with Barbara Hale, there were 2 scenes that got over 35,000 letters when it went on the air in one day, and from one showing, and that was one of them. And it so affected the people that all that mail came in.
What was the scene with Barbara Hale?
Barbara Hale was one where we were not allowed to, you know, dance together. We were not allowed to have dinner alone, or, you know, any of those things. But I'm going out, and I said, let's let Mason go outdoor and put his top coat on her, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's cold. She's lying, and she's asleep, and she's worked hard all day. So I went to Barbara, and I said, now, this is his coat, okay? And you snuggle up to this every time he takes you home in the car and everything. So don't overdo it, because I don't want them to catch on what we're doing. And the camera went out on her, snuggling up to this coat. And you know that, you know, she knew Mason wore this coat in her sleep and everything like that. And she did it so beautifully. So we got all these letters and saying, that's fine, now we know.
And you know what? Given the constraints of the time and everything that's unspoken and the tension underlying that, that's probably sexier than anything overt.
Oh, God, she was marvelous in it, and it was sexy.
As successful as the show was, and obviously you're very fond of it and enjoy talking about it to this day, I read where you felt as if you got too absorbed in it. It took your life over too much.
Oh, I lived in the studio. I wanted to leave the show after 5 years, because I suddenly realized that those were the best years of my life, and the best years to raise a family, and the best years to be married, and I was doing neither. And for one reason or another, I stayed 4 more years, but it's the one thing I regret. And I was asked by the London Times, would I do anything over again? I said, yes, I would not do the Perry Mason show over again. And I added, I would not do it for the 9 years over again. Mm-hmm. I would do it for 4, maybe 5, but that would be it. Because, you know, I should have been involved in other things.
back with Raymond Burr. We already mentioned A Place in the Sun. You worked with George Stevens on that one. Another great director you worked with, Alfred Hitchcock. You were the bad guy in Rear Window.
It's a point of view. No, it is. They just asked me would I be interested in the sequel to Rear Window, and I said, you know, because most of the cast of that one are gone, and Jimmy Stewart is the only one really left.
Grace Kelly's gone.
If you go through all of the people, they're all gone. Judith Evil and Ross Bagdasarian, everybody, and that's a large cast too. And I pointed out to these folks that at no time during that picture did they ever prove that that man killed that little dog and buried him in the garden that he was supposed to have killed. And at no time did they ever have the slightest proof that he had done anything untoward toward his wife. So if you do a sequel, I will hold out for the fact that he was innocent.
How many minutes, actually, were you on camera in that film? Your implied presence and the impending danger was really what made it. And, of course, Hitchcock was a master at milking that suspense and anticipation.
Well, you never heard me talk because it was always, you know, Mr. Hitchcock was merciless with me on that. We were good friends, and then, so I'd come around and he'd say, now, that scene, I'd said, what scene? He said, we're going to film 10 minutes today of you and your wife in that scene. And I said, what scene? And he said, Raymond, didn't anyone tell you that I expected you to write a scene for that scene? And I did, you know, so I had to write it. It wasn't there. And there were 10 minutes of filming on you having a terrible argument.
And now to a lesser role. But again, maybe it depends upon your point of view, because if you were a 7-year-old kid watching Godzilla 9 times in 1 week on the $1 Million Movie, as I did in 1959, and I remember saying to myself, wait a minute, this is Perry Mason, and he's in Japan, he's in Tokyo, and Godzilla is destroying the city. It was only afterwards that I learned that in the Japanese version, you're not even in the movie.
Nor in Japan. I'm down here in one little studio on Western Avenue, the smallest studio in this town, and we shot all of that movie, everything that I was in that movie, in a 24-hour period.
The tanks have been wiped out by a wall of flames. Neither man nor his machines are able to stop this creature.
When they shot King Kong versus Godzilla, a lesser film, but a film of some note anyway, when they shot it, there was a Japanese ending in which Godzilla won and an American ending in which King Kong won, because I guess they feel the countries have rooting interests in their own particular monster.
Yeah. I think it's funny because somebody was talking about Godzilla, and I'm trying to get the rights because I've always liked Godzilla.
This is it, George. Steve Martin signing off from Tokyo, Japan.
This has been a great pleasure spending this half hour with Raymond Burr. A reminder, Perry Mason.
May 21st.
May 21st on NBC. And we'll see you later.